All right, okay to be American listeners. I have a very special guest who has actually warmed my heart in so many ways, and her name is Brenda Hill Skylstad. Am I saying that correctly, Brenda?
You did, yes.
Perfect. She is actually a whistleblower um, who was able to get the first initial anti-SLAPP lawsuit into place here in the United States. Do I have that correct, Brenda?
Yes.
Great. So, what I want to do is just go through the timeline, the series of events, how everything started, and where you're at now. Are you ready, Brenda?
Yes, I am.
All right, hit us with all the information you got.
Yes. So, Gary, my ex-husband and I got married in 1981. And we had two children. They were really little. And so in 1984, our dream was to buy a home. And so Gary had mentioned to his boss at work that we were out kind of looking at houses, and his boss, Rick Oakley, mentioned that his wife, Jackie, was working for a company that may be able to help us. And so we connected with his wife, Jackie, and Jackie worked for a real estate company by the name of Robert John Real Estate. And we didn't know anything about going through a title company or, any of the traditional routes to getting a loan, or that having a title stitch would be a good idea, or any of those things. I was 21, just barely 21, and I believe Gary was 23. And so we were just really excited. So we looked at some different houses, and we chose one that was a Cape Cod. Now the interest rates, the purchase price was $78,000, and the terms were five years, 9%, and then 5 years, 12%, and then at the end of 10 years, we would have a balloon payment, or we would have to cash them out. And so when the interest rates dropped in 1986, my husband, he said, given our contract and the terms that we've got in place, 8% is less than what we're paying now, and it would lock us into, if we could get something that would lock us into that percent, that would be a win for us. And so I took our contract to a mortgage company, and I remember walking into the mortgage company, and there was a gentleman sitting behind a desk and asked, could he help me? And I told him I was interested in finding out what we would need to do to qualify for a loan. And so I pulled out my contract, and he kind of got a smirk on his face, and he sat back in his chair, and he said, "Oh, another one of these." And I thought, what in the world does he mean by that? I felt very uncomfortable. He said, "If I were you, the first place I would go to is the treasurer's office." And I thought that was kind of an odd thing to say to me, so I went to the courthouse, and I actually started at the auditor's office, and I I wrote down my name and my address, and I told her that I had been told by the mortgage company to go and talk to them at the courthouse. So she said, "Just give me a minute and I'll be right back." So she came back in a couple of minutes, and she said, "I'm sorry, but I can't find your name listed on this property at all. Nowhere. She said there's a slot for owner, there's a slot for buyer, and your name isn't anywhere. As far as the county's concerned, you don't exist having any interest in this property. And I was shocked because at that point, we had been making payments for 2 years. And looking back, I should have had some flags up that we were mailing our payments into the real estate company directly. And then every 6 months we would send our property tax into them as well. So we weren't sending anything directly to, as far as our property tax, to the county. It was everything. Every check we wrote was to the real estate company. We didn't know that was unusual. And so
what you're saying is that you were sending everything into the real estate company, not whoever had the mortgage contract themselves?
We bought the home on a real estate contract with the real estate company, Robert John Real Estate. And so that's who we sent everything into. So there wasn't a bank involved. They carried the contract, and we put $2,000 down. And so everything was through them. We didn't have a conventional loan. And so we didn't know what was normal, what wasn't normal.
Okay.
We were just very young.
Right. I think we've all been there in our lives where, we're young and naive and we learn hard lessons along the way. So.
Yes, absolutely. So the auditor's office told me to go to the treasurer's office. So I did. And so I explained to her what had been said to me. And she said, if I were you, I would go back to the real estate company and tell them that you were told that that the treasurer's office was under the impression that was supposed to be the excise tax was supposed to be is the seller's responsibility in the state of Washington, and that they should have had that paid within 30 days of the sale. And because that was not paid, we weren't able to put our name on the contract, on the register with the county that we were even purchasing the home.
Right.
And so I went to the real estate company and I told him how, just what I had found out, and could he please explain to me. I told him I really didn't understand, what was happening, and could he explain it to me? And he got kind of a snotty smirk on his face, and he walked over to the file cabinet and he said, well, he said, is this a copy of the contract that you and your husband signed? Is that your signature? And I said, yes, it is. And he said, well, in the contract it states that either party can record the contract, but it's the party that is interested in doing that's responsibility to pay the excise tax and to get the contract recorded. So I went back to the treasurer's office and I told them what was said to me, and she said, that's strange that he's telling you that if you want this contract recorded, that you should pay that, because The excise tax, some states call it transfer tax. It's like a sales tax. And I'm not an attorney, but from my understanding, in the state of Washington, within 30 days, once there is a sale that's gone through on a home, that is due to the county, and if it's late, then an interest begins and penalties are accrued when that's not paid. So we were talking about at that point in 1987, $1,300.
Okay.
So that was the amount that should have been paid 2 years before then. So the lady told me that if she was me, she said, I would take a copy of your contract and send it to the Department of Revenue in Olympia. And so that is what I did. I made a copy, and I sent a copy of my contract to the Department of Revenue and explained to them what had happened to me during that day, what I had found out. And so I got a letter from them about a week later, somewhere in there. The letter said that it would be helpful if I could get the names, addresses, and phone numbers of any other homeowners that I knew of that were also purchasing a home through the company, and forward that information to them. And so I knew from looking, when we went out looking at the houses, that there were maybe two, maybe three other subdivisions, but I really didn't have a real idea of how many homeowners that there were involved. Certainly had no inkling that there were over 300 of us.
So you're saying that there were 300 homes that were sold by the same real estate company. Is that correct?
Yes. In fact, they sold homes not only that they owned, but they were selling other people's homes, like investors. And they were doing this without someone in the office who was a licensed broker, and without licensed agents.
Wow.
So, and that was something I found out as things progressed. I did not know that until after the investigation started.
So the home that you moved into, it was a newly built home, correct?
It was it was fairly new. It was a prefab, modular home, and it was very nice. It was our dream home. It was 4 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms, and it was absolutely perfect. In fact, we didn't realize when we signed the papers that I was pregnant. And so we didn't realize how much that we would need that extra space. So we were surprised to find out that we were expecting our 3rd child after we signed the papers.
Wow. So there was a lot of stress on your plate finding out that you were pregnant, and then moving into this brand new home. And how long after did you say that that you discovered what was happening with the loan?
It was 2 years from the time that we signed the papers.
Okay.
Until the interest rates dropped to 8% in 1986.
Okay. So here you are with a 2-year-old and
yes.
a It was a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 4-year-old. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
In 1987, that was their ages.
Okay. And you discover all of this while you're trying to be a stay-at-home mom, and you realize that you're everything that you have is on the line based off the fact that this real estate company is not performing the way that they should, right?
Right. So what that means, what it really came down to is, let's say that they default on their loan. Okay, this is just hypothetical. They default on their loan, and if the contract's never been recorded, which cannot happen until that excise tax has been paid. Okay, so then now I have to have the burden of proving my interest in the home. I mean, so you're, not only are you not following the laws of the state and the procedures that are in place, which that money goes to our schools. Now, it leaves you vulnerable.
Right.
Because if anything happens with them, with their loan, then you have to prove, well, wait a minute, I'm in this scenario too with this house. And so it really left all of us in a really bad situation.
Yes. Was this so this was a normal practice by real estate companies at the time, because when you initially went with the paperwork to that, I'm sorry, I can't remember what office you said you took it to, where they said, "Oh, another one of these." What
Right. Yeah, it was a mortgage company.
Okay.
I chose one at random. And obviously he was very familiar. He was extremely familiar with the contract, and the fact that until, his reaction, which I didn't understand, what he was saying is, there's nothing I can do to help you because the procedures that should have been followed weren't followed. So therefore, there was nothing his office could do as far as helping me with a loan, because again, I wasn't, as far as the legal process goes, I wasn't even in the equation for the home. I needed to prove that I had any kind of an interest in it.
Right. So, I mean, it didn't even look like a rent-to-own scenario, because your name was not even involved in any of it. So it was the real estate company that owned the loan, right? And they were supposed to be paying the loan.
Right. They actually owned the houses, but they did have loans out on them. And so but I didn't know that at the time. So
Right.
It was learning something new. It was like an onion unpeeling.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So what so what did you do when you found out that there were so many homes that were most likely, because you're supposed to go out and you're supposed to get signatures from people who are basically in the same scenario as you, right?
Absolutely.
So what happened?
Okay, so what I did is I kind of figured that, if I had dinner on the table when my husband got home, then it would free me up to be able to go and spend a couple hours knocking on doors. And what I did is I showed them, I said, look, I'm not selling anything to you. I just want you to know that I'm buying a home just like you are. And this is a letter from the state. And based on this letter, if you choose to give me your name, address, and phone number, The only thing I'm going to do with it is forward it to the state. And I'm showing you this letter to show you that my reason is legitimate, and to explain to you that that's what's being asked of me. But I certainly did not realize the scope or the amount. I figured there was maybe 100 of us, but I certainly had no idea that we were talking about 6, maybe 7 subdivisions.
Wow.
Yeah. It was,
so
yeah.
So how many? So you just started going and knocking on doors, like you said. You fed the family. Everybody was good to go. You walked out that door and you just started walking the neighborhoods, having people, basically sign saying yes that this is happening, right?
Absolutely. What was interesting to me, this is what blew me away, was as I was going and gathering this information, I would have people tell me, wait a minute, I'm sending in my payments and my property tax to Robert John Real Estate, but I'm buying it from Dr. Kenneth Saunders down in San Diego, or I'm buying it from another company.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sending in my payments and my property tax to Robert John Real Estate. And so then what I would do is I would go to the county's computer and I would go and find these companies, and I would find out how many other people were coming up under that same listed as under that same owner.
Oh my
and so
gosh.
This thing just kept growing, and so I would continue to get information, and then I would take it down to the county treasurer's office, and they would forward it to the Department of Revenue. And so it just kept growing from there.
Yeah. So that was going to be my question, is how many of them were shocked to figure this out, and it sounds like you uncovered yet another hand that was dipping their hands in the same pot, correct?
Yeah.
Now, was there anybody that was not surprised? Was there anybody that you knocked on their door and they said, "Yeah, I know that's happening. That's how it works"?
I actually had a couple of people, but it was very, very few, that were like, "Oh, we know what's going on. It's no big deal." But that was very, very rare. I think out of I don't know how many hundred people I talked to, there might have been 2
Wow.
that weren't concerned, didn't think it was a big deal. We weren't planning on really keeping the house that long anyway. So that did happen, but it was certainly not the norm.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. I got you off track there. So you gathered these signatures and you uncovered additional information on who owned the loan, basically, and who was paying who. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes. So I was very surprised that I was coming up with different individuals' names and corporations' names, but yet we were all sending our checks into the real estate company. So I decided that I didn't want to miss anybody, and that this was pretty important. So I went to talk to the local reporter at the newspaper, and so she kind of did some research and make sure that what I was saying was on the level, and also the Oregonian newspaper got wind about what I was doing in this, and that the Columbian was getting ready to run a story, so they contacted me as well, and so both papers were doing stories. And so in the process of this, I got a call from the real estate company, and they wanted me to come in and talk to me. And so I notified the state, the Department of Revenue. I said, look, they want me to come in and talk to them. Do I do this? Do I not do this? What do I do? And they said, yeah, go ahead and go in and talk to them, but just don't mention us. Don't say anything about us. Don't tell them anything about the letter we sent. Don't.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So I went into the real estate company, and I found it really interesting, and people don't know that this happened. But what happened is they sat me down, and they said, look, here's the deal. If you'll be quiet and you'll stop stirring up this big mess that you've stirred up, look what time it is. Oh my gosh, we can go down right now, and go pay your excise tax and get your contract recorded. If we could do that for you today, would you stop everything that you're doing? And I said, so let me get this right. You will do that for me. But what about the other homeowners that walk in your office and you tell them the same story you told me, that basically, hey, look, it's up to you. You want this contract recorded, then you go pay this tax. And you know good and well that's not what the state law is. And I said, so what about the other homeowners? And they're like, well, we'll take care of them later, but if you'll stop everything you're doing, we'll go pay. At this moment, we are going to drop everything we're doing and go pay your excise tax and record your contract.
Hush money.
Mm-hmm. That was the offer that I was given.
Oh my gosh. So what did you do? Did you take the coward's way out, or did you say, heck no, I'm here for my fellow man?
I said, forget it. You aren't talking about protecting my neighbors, and I will not be told to be quiet.
Good for you, Brenda. Good.
So I went home and told my husband everything about the discussion and what was said, and he told me I made the right choice. I also notified the state the next day of the conversation, and they said, that was good, and that you didn't mention us. They let me know that their concern was they didn't want documents to start coming up missing before they could serve whatever papers. And so what I had done also is I went and talked to an attorney just at random, and my reasoning was I could tell from talking to some of the homeowners they were panicked. They wanted to know, what does this mean? Where does this leave us? And I didn't want everybody to go out and hire their own lawyers. And so I had approached a Mr. Higgins. He was an attorney there, and I said, I'm not even saying it will ever come to this, but if the homeowners choose to do a class action, if they refuse to follow what's being asked of them by the state or whatever, if it ever comes down the road to it, would you be interested, if enough of the homeowners were interested in doing a class action against them, would that be something you'd be interested in? And he said, well, if there was enough of them, we could see what we could do and talk about it. That was my only time to go and to meet with a lawyer. I didn't talk about anything about me personally. It just was on a what if kind of thing. And so I had asked Mr. Dave Johnson of the Department of Revenue in Olympia. I said, you know what? How about if we did this? If I could set up, if I found a place that would accommodate all the homeowners, would the state be willing to come down from Olympia and address the homeowners, answer their questions, and just explain to them where this leaves them and what you're doing and whatever. So he said, let me talk to my supervisor. And he called me the next day and he said, my supervisor said they would agree to do this if the homeowners understood that we will only address questions that have to do with the Department of Revenue. We won't talk about anything else. It has to stay within those perimeters. That is the only thing that we'll agree to. So I had found a high school, Prairie High School in Vancouver, agreed to let us use their facility. And I set up for the 16th of July, 1987, this meeting. I went to both papers, and so this was out there. This meeting was known. It was not secret. The date, the time, everything was known. And so on the 14th of July, about 8:30 at night, I was cleaning up after dinner, giving kids baths, that kind of thing. And there was a knock on the door. And I answered the door, and this person said, "Are you Brenda Hill?" And I said, "Yes." And then he looked at me and said, "You have been served." So now I'm standing there holding a packet in my hand, and I've got no clue what's happening here. At that point in time, as far as I was concerned, I was done. I'd already turned everything I had over to the state. And as far as I was concerned, other than this meeting, which I had planned on not saying anything, I was out of the picture. And so I'm looking through these documents, and it is a lawsuit for $100,000 defamation against me and my husband. And in the very bottom of the stack is a subpoena for 8 a.m. So not even 12 hours from then. Here's a subpoena for court the very next morning. I've got no money, no lawyer. I'm in shock. I'm in tears. I don't understand what any of this means, why they're doing this to me. And I was just absolutely at a loss.
Can I ask you, Brenda, how long was it between the time that you had turned all the information over and you felt as though it was out of your hands at that point to the time that you received that summons for court? What was the time frame there?
I would say probably like 2 weeks. Obviously they were aware of the meeting that was coming up, and they wanted to shut me up. That was very clear.
Okay. So you feel it was the meeting that had brought everything on, because, it's obviously it's made to the public, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah,
okay.
It was in the papers. It was very well known, and the timing that they did this, it was clear that it was designed to silence me before the meeting. And I had not said, I didn't say that to anybody that I was planning on speaking at that meeting, because I wasn't. To me, I had invited the state, and it was their show. It was their thing, not me. Nobody needed to hear anything from me. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know anything about law. So, to me, it hadn't, this is the state's meeting. So, in tears, about 9 o'clock at night, I found a home number for that attorney that I had approached about the possibility of a class action lawsuit. And I called him at 9 o'clock at home. And he could hear in my voice I was absolutely beside myself. And he said, "Look," he said, "I will be there for you in the morning. I'm willing to do that. I will promise you nothing else, but I will be there for you. And so, my husband and I showed up a few minutes before 8, and so did the attorney. And he took me aside and he said, I'm going to be really honest with you. You don't have any money. You're a really nice lady. And I feel really bad that this is happening to you, and it shouldn't be happening to you. But here's the deal. Beyond this hearing, I'm not going to do anything more for you. You don't have any money.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So he was very clear that, this is it. I will appear with you. So he went through the papers quickly before the hearing so he could get up to speed. And so at the hearing, here comes these two gentlemen in three-piece suits, and they said to the judge, look, here's the deal. If we don't shut her up, she's going to ruin us. That's what they said.
These were people from the real estate company in these three-piece suits?
The attorneys that they had hired. Yes.
Right. So they're representing this real estate company that...
Yes.
Wow.
And ironically, the owner of this real estate company is a real estate lawyer, Warren Ashman, address Avenue of the Stars, Beverly Hills, 90210. So, yeah, he hired some lawyers, and like I said, they said, if we don't shut her up, she's going to ruin us. And so here I'm terrified. I don't understand any of this. And I turned to Mr. Higgins and he said, look, you don't have a choice but to sign and agree to this temporary restraining order. Looking back, I wish that I had never agreed to it. There was no reason I needed to agree to it. But he told me I didn't have a choice. And so we did agree to it. And we were utterly devastated. We didn't understand. This was just overwhelming for us. And so, and then the very next day was the homeowners meeting. So all of the press covered that I was being sued, and obviously, since I didn't call them and tell them, the real estate company did.
So, wait a minute. So you're telling me you have a gag order in place?
Yes.
And so now the real estate company is blabbing and saying whatever the heck they want as defamation towards you.
Exactly. And I'm being told to be quiet, and I'm terrified. So when the homeowners meeting was supposed to happen, get this, the real estate company calls up the state of Washington, Department of Revenue, and says, look, we don't want you at that meeting. We're going to send our own lawyers in to head up this meeting. We don't want you there. And so the Department of Revenue said, okay.
Are you kidding me?
No. There was not one person from the state. Mr. Higgins did agree and was there to help answer questions, but it was not something that the real estate company was thrilled about. And they basically ran the entire show. And interestingly enough, a lot of the homeowners saw right through what was happening. There were TV cameras, there was newspaper. This thing was covered huge. It was huge. And I just sat there. And the only thing I said, I introduced myself, and I said that the only thing that the school has asked me is please make sure we don't leave any trash on the floor, blah, blah, blah. And that was the end of it. I didn't say anything beyond that.
What was going through your head at the moment? I mean, at this moment you probably realized that you they belittled you. They have currently made you scum of the earth in the newspapers overnight
Yes.
because you did have the papers backing you.
Yeah.
So clearly, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, looking at this is, as you know, I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm looking at this saying, how many of these people in all these agencies were paid off?
I have wondered that. I've wondered, how does some guy sitting in an office in Beverly Hills wield that much power or influence over the heads of our state agencies that they would leave over 300 homeowners high and dry and not even show up at a meeting they agreed to?
Oh my gosh.
Who does that? Who does that? Without any explanation. And then it got worse for me because now I'm getting told from the state, the Department of Revenue, the Department of the Attorney General's office, and Department of Licensing, I'm being told, you know what? We really think you're really nice. We really appreciate everything you did. Without you, we would have never had our investigation. But under the state, because of our legal counsel, we cannot speak to you. We can't respond to your calls. We can't talk to you.
Was this before or after the meeting?
It was right. It was the day that I called them to let them know that I had just left court.
Wow.
And they didn't even tell me themselves they weren't going to be at the meeting. The press had it in the paper that the state wasn't going to be at the meeting. They didn't even have the courtesy to tell me themselves we're not showing up.
Wow.
So, yeah, it just...
So I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it just got worse by the minute. It just seemed that's how it felt.
Yeah, it was a total snowball effect is what it looks like. Things were in your favor. You had people backing you, and you had people explaining to you that although this is usual practice, it wasn't a proper practice, and that, it almost seemed like they were encouraging you that if there were enough people on your side, you would be able to fix this for everybody. And then just overnight, it all completely fell apart and started going in the opposite direction.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, like real fast. Then it got worse for me. I went and I met with Bruce Mowry, who was I didn't even know we had defamation coverage through our homeowners policy. I had never even heard of defamation before. And so we met with him in a high-rise in Portland, Oregon. And so, I'm expecting him to just explain to me what's happening and to be in my corner. Finally, somebody's going to be in my corner. Someone's going to help me fight this. And he sits back in his chair, very dignified gentleman, and he looked at me and he said, look, this is the way it is. You ever talk to somebody from the state, you ever talk to anybody from the press, you ever talk to anybody I tell you not to, you ever do anything I tell you not to do, you will walk in that courtroom alone. Do you understand?
Oh, geez.
Yeah. That was my first meeting of who's supposed to be my attorney.
I want everybody who's listening right now to think back to when you were 22 years old and this entire snowball of events, rabbit hole that you dug down into happens. All of this has happened to you at the age of 22 years old, and a lawyer says this to you, how terrified were you, Brenda?
Oh, there's not words. I left that office in tears. I felt like my entire world had just caved in. Then I dealt with the local paper. The editor told me, or not the editor, but the editor of the business section told me, you brought this all on yourself. Don't look for any sympathy from me. She went as far as doing an editorial saying that I brought this all on myself and not to feel sorry for me, that it's all on my own head, and, that's pretty much the way that it is. I could not believe, to add insult to injury, for her to do an editorial on top of everything else going on, and I can't say anything. I can't do a rebuttal. I can't do anything. I'm sitting there feeling like my hands are tied and I'm gagged. So a year after my first meeting with Mr. Mowry, supposed to be my attorney, I called him because a neighbor had come and knocked on my door and said, Brenda, have you seen this? And it was a 3-page letter. And this 3-page letter said that because of Brenda Hill, Robert John Real Estate I'm the cause of the demise of Robert John Real Estate. Who is this Brenda Hill? What is she getting out of all of this?
Oh my gosh.
Oh yeah, it went on and on. 3-page letter to over 360 homeowners.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm sitting there, and the only thing that my attorney would say to me is, Brenda, let sleeping dogs fly. That was his favorite saying.
Oh.
Let sleeping dogs lie. It didn't matter what happened. That was his stock answer. I'd never even heard of that term before. And I was just utterly, utterly devastated. And so at that point, hold on one second. Baby, could you please just hold for Teddy for me? Thank you. Sorry, my chihuahua.
It's okay.
Chihuahua. Anyway, so at that point, I looked at my husband and I said, here is the deal. I was so upset. I was so beside myself. I looked at him and I said, you know what? If I walk in that courtroom by myself, I am tired of being told to be quiet. I am tired of the insults. I am tired of the neighbors throwing toilet paper in my yard, telling me they don't want me here. I had one man call me and said, don't you have little kids that need you to be watching them? Don't you have any more to do than stir things up?
So, okay, my question is are they upset merely because this real estate company is going under based off of their actions that they're claiming is your fault, or is something happening to their loans now that is going to make them lose their homes? I mean, why are they so upset at you over a real estate company?
I think they were more upset at what they perceived could be, because there never was, there was never any letter saying that they were going defunct. There was no letter stating that they couldn't meet their obligations. There was nothing official that came out. I think it was more people being, their fears, getting away with them. I don't know. And what's really sad was that was the reason I wanted the meeting that the state was supposed to come down and answer questions. That was the reason, was because I wanted people to have a clear understanding, so there wasn't misinformation, so there wasn't panic, or that was the reason the meeting was supposed to happen. And so now I have these homeowners that won't talk to me. They won't talk to me in the grocery store. They don't want to be seen talking to me. It was just, my dream home became, I wondered if it was bugged. And I know this may
Oh
sound really
my
paranoid.
gosh.
In my world, I worried, was my home bugged? Um, I didn't have a license, so I did buses everywhere. And so, I remember one day I was walking with my 3 kids, and we were walking in the parking lot of the McDonald's, and I noticed this car, this station wagon, was actually speeding up when they were getting closer to us, not slowing down. And when I looked closer, it was actually the manager of the real estate company.
No
James
way.
Tapio. Yeah.
Oh
And
my
so
gosh.
here I am with my 3 babies, and we're all holding hands walking, and I remember grabbing them and pulling them to the side. And finally he slowed down like at the last minute, but it was terrifying. It was terrifying. And
So his intimidation doesn't stop through lawyers and whoever he's paying off in the agencies. It's full blown through his employees.
yeah, it was, my home became, it felt more like a prison. It felt more like, instead of it being a place where I was joyful to raise my family, to raise my kids, it became, it just, I don't know how to describe it. It was just very sad. And then I was going to tell you, so after the 3-page letter, I said to my husband, I don't care if we walk in the courtroom alone. I've had enough. So I called the Seattle Times and the Seattle PI, and it was the best thing I ever did. It was as terrifying as it was, and having the full weight of the possible consequences of dialing that number, and knowing that I was going against my lawyer, and knowing what he said about, if you ever do anything I tell you not to do, you will walk in that courtroom alone. Do you understand? I mean, that was just like a tape recorder playing in the back of my head as I'm dialing the number for the Seattle Times and the Seattle PI. And what was so interesting is that the Seattle PI editor was sure that I was a crackpot. He was positive that there's no way my story could be true, that it was so bizarre and out there, that he wanted me to go away. And one of the reporters who happened to used to work for the Columbia newspaper in Vancouver, Washington, happened to be down in Vancouver from Seattle visiting friends and got the flu really bad. And so Larry Warner, his name, I called his editor and said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm not going to be able to make it up to Seattle to come to work. I'm in Vancouver, and I've got the flu. I'm really, really sick. And the editor said, there's a lady there. This Brenda Hill person has called a couple of times, and he said, there's no way her story could be true. Could you meet with her and just check this woman out? Because her story's just too bizarre.
Wow.
So I got a phone call, and it was Larry Warner. And he said, I work for the PI, which is the second largest, it was, before it went defunct, the second largest paper in the state of Washington. And he said, my editor has asked me to call you and see if we could meet before I head back up to Seattle. Would that be possible? And I said I would be honored. And so he came to my house, and I had a box with all of my documentation. And unbeknownst to me, he had also contacted friends of his from the local paper and had gathered some of the articles from them. So he was very up to speed. And so we met and we talked for about 2 hours. And he asked me would I like to get something to eat. I said sure. So he took me to a restaurant, and he said, "Wait here just a minute. I'm going to go make a phone call." And so I said, "Oh, sure, no problem." So we came back about 5-10 minutes later, whatever it was, and he says, "Brenda, I want you to order anything off of that menu that you want." He said, "The paper's paying for it." And he said, "I'm going to be completely honest with you. My editor thought that you were crazy and that your story was so bizarre, there was no way there was any legitimate, there was just nothing to it. There was no way." And so he said, "Brenda, we're going to do this story." And so
Wow.
I didn't tell him, but I had also contacted the Seattle Times. And so my story made it on the very same day, made the front page of the Seattle Times and B1 of the Seattle PI on the very same day, which I had no idea that would happen.
Wow.
And everything changed for me. Everything. For the first time, instead of living in a world where I felt like there was anybody there for me, now I had people calling me from all over the state wanting me to know that they were there for me and that they cared. It was incredible. There's not words.
Wow, that is amazing. So once again, overnight, things flipped, and they flipped back in your direction this time.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Wow. And so just so we understand time frame here, so at this point you're now 23 years old, right? A year after the gag order had been put in place, is that correct?
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. So I've had the gag order for about a year. And so I didn't call my attorney to let him know what I had done. I figured that he'd find out on his own. And then I'd get this nasty letter to tell me to get lost, to take a hike. But that letter never came, thank God.
Wow.
So now I have, what's interesting to me is you're talking about somebody who had never registered to vote. Never. I couldn't have told you who the governor was, and I didn't care. Couldn't have told you who any of the legislators I couldn't have told you who they were, and it really did not matter to me one iota. It was so far from my thoughts. And here I am after some of these articles. I am being asked to go and testify before the House and the Senate. And I am fighting for a law to protect other people that just want to bring to the attention of whatever state or local agency something that they find that is wrong. And I wanted them to be protected. I never wanted anybody else to ever have a knock on the door at 8:30 at night to be served with papers that they had to be in court at 8 o'clock the next morning without a dime to their name.
Oh, man.
And no attorney that actually is there for them, not out of pity, but somebody that's fighting. That's all my goal was. And I wanted desperately for the state to help me fight what was happening to me. What I didn't understand is the reason that we have a House and a Senate is to make laws. And without laws and without statutes, there was nothing the state could do. There wasn't. Their hands were tied. And I had a hard time understanding that. And so once I did wrap my head around that, then I thought, you know what? So what you're saying is because there's not a law in place that you can help me in any way. Then if there's not, why not? And if there's not, then let's make it happen. And so that right there, because of my absolute nightmare, I didn't want anyone else to go through it. No more sleepless nights, no crying yourself to sleep, no feeling absolutely isolated and overwhelmed.
Right. So how long, because I feel like I feel like we skipped ahead, which, you said that beautifully, Brenda. I mean, you really laid that out beautifully. And what I do want to come back to this, because this part is the most crucial part of the entire story as far as I'm concerned. It's what gave you your name, right? So what I kind of want to go back to where we were at, where you had you had called the newspaper, you expected something from your lawyer, and you never received anything. So did he continue to stay your lawyer until all this was over?
He did, and he never could. I was shocked. There was never any. I expected an angry confrontation, and in your face, how dare you? I laid it out very clear to you. What was going to happen if you did this and you went ahead and did this? This is the consequence. That never happened.
Did he ever say anything about it, or did he just pretend like it never happened?
He just went on with whatever. He just rolled with the punches, and he never. It shocked me. It seriously and honestly shocked me that I never got a nasty letter from Mutual Eamon Claw, or however I say their name. I never got. They did cancel me as a client, as a customer, because of the defamation suit. They didn't care that that it shouldn't have happened in the first place. They didn't care that there was really no merits to the lawsuit. They just dropped me. So I had to go find another homeowner's insurance on top of everything else. But they never dropped me, and that surprised me. As far as being my lawyer, that surprised me.
So how much longer of a fight did you have? What happened after that? What?
Excuse me. So from the time from July 14, when I was served, it was March of '89 before the law, if that's what you're asking me,
yes,
was enacted. It was in March of '89 that the law was enacted, and that was so amazing. I lined up my babies on the Capitol steps. I picketed. Anybody I thought that I could get to listen to me, to help me, I picketed them. It wasn't out of spite or malice or anything more than, you know what, my life is an absolute mess right now, and I need your help. And I'm not in the mood to take no for an answer.
You had been told no too much.
I'm not taking no for an answer, and I'm not going away. Just in case you don't know that about me, I'm not going away. I actually met with the governor. There was a day that there was a press release from his office stating that not only would I meet with him, but that there would be a press conference by him and myself after the meeting. And so I got to the Capitol in Olympia. My cousin took me, and I was approached by an attorney. Excuse me, not an attorney, but my the reporter. I was approached by the reporter for the PI, Seattle Post Intelligencer, and he said, "Brenda, I need to talk to you." He said, when I came walking into the governor's office, the press secretary, Greg Fisher, was talking to the reporter for the Columbian newspaper, and she was telling him that you brought all this on yourself, and that they asked you to back off and you didn't, and that she felt that it was inappropriate for them to hold a press conference after the governor meets with you, and so it's been canceled.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's been canceled. That's what he said. He said the governor's going to meet with you. They're willing to take some pictures of him going to go and meet with you, but there's not going to be a press conference afterwards.
So would you say that when they found out there was going to be a press conference, some of his donors probably decided, go through with this, and you're gonna have money taken?
I honestly don't know what transpired. I just know that I felt very betrayed. I could not believe that some reporter from, I'm sorry, but to me it's a rag paper, the Columbia newspaper in Vancouver, Washington, to me is, as far as I'm concerned, there's no integrity. And so for a reporter from the business section to have that much pull on a press secretary, and for the governor's office itself to put out that there was going to be a press conference after I met with him, and for them to cancel it so abruptly without a reason, to me that was just, I don't know, it just added so much insult to so much. I was just so upset.
Yeah, you thought all that was over with at that point, because you had contacted the papers and things had turned around, and then just out of nowhere you got stabbed in the back.
Exactly. And it just showed how low that the paper is. And that reporter in particular, Jolie Anderson. So we went ahead. So there was a lot of press, TV, newspaper sitting there waiting for me to come out of the governor's office. And so I went in, and the governor graciously even invited my cousin in his office. And we sat there and talked about the case, what I'd been through. But as he was getting ready to leave his office, I asked him a question that made him stop and pause. I said, I want to know why the state that says they're so strapped for cash estimated that the real estate company owed at least $477,000, but they settled for $351,000. And the governor stopped and looked at his press secretary and he said, what did she just say? Why did we do that? I want you to look into that. And so, I never heard any more about it, but the governor seemed to be very upset.
Wow.
That the state estimated that the taxes were upwards to $477,000.
Wow.
And that's clear back. That's money. That's a lot of money today in 2018. But I'm talking about 87.
Yeah.
Is when they, decided how much was owed, and that's a big difference.
So now that you're speaking of that, it reminds me of a question that I had. You said that the initial fee and cost for everything to have been transferred, you know, as soon as you signed that paperwork was $1,300.
Right, on my home alone.
On your home loan. What?
I mean, on my home by itself. I apologize.
Okay. So what was it by the time you figured it out a year later?
What they calculated was based on not only what they were finding was not just that the houses were sold to the people who were occupying them at the moment. They were finding that there were owners before then, and before then, and before then, and that none of those sales were recorded.
Oh my gosh.
And none of those taxes were paid. So this wasn't just you owe us based on, at this moment, X amount of dollars. This was you have been defrauding the state for a long time.
Wow.
And we're just now finding this out. And so we don't want to just charge you for what you owe us at the moment. You sold that house to so-and-so before the current person that's in there, and to someone else before that. So this was bigger than anybody could have thought.
Well, it sounds to me what would have happened, and correct me if I'm reading this wrong, Brenda, but they were paying zero taxes on the loan, or, you know, on the property. They were paying zero property tax, which is typically tied into the loan. And when the deed would have been signed over to you after fulfilling the loan, it would have come back on you, all of those taxes, because at that point the property is under your name. Is that correct?
I'm not really sure if that would have been the case, because I'm assuming they would have been held responsible, but that, you know, maybe that is what could have happened. I just know that the state was entitled to their money, and that this company seemed like they were going out of their way to make sure that they never got it, and weren't aware that they were entitled to it. And it just was like a snowball that just kept going.
Okay, so you at what time frame does it come into play, when, because you and I were discussing bits and pieces of all of this yesterday. Where does the you know, you were telling me you were going to the law library and you were studying the law, and at some point you had discovered something that could have been that would have been filed. I can't remember who you told me it was going to be filed to, but you said you could file it, and you called the lady and you said, "What's your favorite cookie?"
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yes. So what happened was, so I still have, you know, the law's enacted, and I'm thrilled. I'm honored, and I'm thrilled that happened. But I still have this gag order and this lawsuit sitting there over my head like a dark cloud.
Okay, so I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep the time frame proper, because I got confused myself. So you're saying that this law, you went to Congress, and you, in the midst of all of this, you helped this anti-SLAPP law come into play in the midst of dealing with all of this. I thought this was after.
No.
Oh, no. Wow, Brenda.
No. This was, no. Because the lawsuit they filed against me was in July of 1987. They didn't drag me into court for a 5-day jury trial until March of 93.
Oh my gosh.
And so because it dragged out for so many years and I was so tired of it, and I had no money and no attorney to help me, I wanted my name back. I wanted to get it over with. I wanted to get on with my life. So what I did is I had heard about a little known law that in the interest of space, if a lawsuit sits for, I believe it's 16, it might be 18 months, that the county clerk can petition the judge to basically notify both the plaintiff and the defendant, either move this thing or lose it, because it's just sitting here and it's taking up space. And this case has not had any motion at all from either side in such and such amount of time, and this is ridiculous. And so I called when I heard about that law, because I didn't know anything about it. And I was so desperate to get my life moved forward that I called and begged this clerk that works for the county, for the judge, and I said, what is your favorite cookies? Whatever they are, I'm bringing them to you. I am desperate. I want my life back. Would you please petition the judge to basically, look, either have this case moved forward or dropped or something. And she said, no one in all, she says, I have been a clerk for something like 15 years. And she said, I've never even heard of anyone ever using that law or doing anything in any way with it. And I said, well, then I'm begging you to be the first.
Wow.
And so I didn't tell my attorney what I had done. I didn't tell anybody. And so what happened is I finally did, because of the Seattle Press, I finally did get an attorney that contacted me through the governor's office and filed a defamation suit against them based on the 3-page letter that they sent out to the homeowners. So now they have their defamation suit against me, but now I finally, after 2 years later, or whatever it was, have one against them for defamation. Okay, and so I got a call from my attorney in Tacoma, and he said, Brenda, I have been notified by the real estate company if we will go to mediation on our case against them, they will be willing to completely drop their lawsuit against you. So I'm thinking I'm going to end up with a check of some sort, which something is better than nothing, and get on with my life. Oh, this is too awesome. Let's do it. Where do we sign?
Right.
Okay, so we go to mediation, and we get $15,000 minus a third to the attorney, minus attorney fees. So what are we looking at? $7,000 maybe-ish?
Oh my gosh.
6 years
No
of my life.
way.
Yeah, this gets good. So 6 years of my life, and I walk away with $7,000. Okay, but to me at that time, it was getting on with my life. That was my goal.
Right.
Okay, so we no more than cash that check. Are you with me on this? We no more than cash that check, and I get a letter in the mail that they were going forward with their case against me. That lawyer that was supposed to be helping me never even bothered to get any of this in writing.
Oh.
He didn't even get it in writing, which to me is unconscionable. How they're saying that they're dropping their suit if I'll go to mediation on my case against them, and you don't even get that in writing. Who does that?
I can't even say that lawyer was even on your side, Brenda.
Yeah. So here I am. I've got my, I'm just trying to go by memory, $7,000. And now, not only were they suing me for $100,000 in the beginning, now, overnight, and nobody even notified me when this happened, why this happened. But now it's gone from $100,000 to $1.2 million.
Oh,
So
man.
now I have a jury trial coming up, a 5-day jury trial coming up, and I am being sued for $1.2 million. I've lost my home. That's gone. And now I've got to go through a jury trial.
So this was in 93, right?
Yes.
So you
Yes.
were about 27, 28 years old at this point. So this all started for you at the age of 22, and here you are at the age of 27, 28 years old. You're still dealing with this, and now the suit has gone what now seems to be a measly $100,000 to $1.2 million.
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
And I cannot even tell you when that happened, because I don't remember getting notified that change happened. And I'm wearing my neighbor's clothes, and I'm bringing peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and cans of whatever soda with me to the courthouse.
Mind you, right, so correct me if I'm wrong, Brenda, but an anti-SLAPP law is now in place, but it does not pertain to you because the law was created after all of this took place for you, correct?
Absolutely. And there was articles that were coming out by legislators who were claiming that, oh, by the way, we're going to make this thing retroactive for Brenda. Now, I'm assuming that was for show.
Yeah.
And for brownie points with their constituents. But I promise you, that is not what ever happened. That there was nobody there from the state of Washington. There was nobody there other than my attorney, their attorneys, plural, and whatever spectators and newspapers, which was the Columbian and the Oregonian, that showed up. There was no Seattle Press. There was no nothing. It was like okay, it was like the Seattle Press, with the law being completed. It was like, okay, well, this story was all wrapped up in a nice, pretty little bow, and the fact that she's being sued for $1.2 million isn't even worth us mentioning this 5-day jury trial.
Oh my gosh.
So nothing. Yeah.
So you're going to court. I mean, at this point, are you still living in the house and are you still married?
I'm still married to Gary. And we'd already, in 1990, we'd lost the house. The contract was written in a way that if you sneezed wrong, they had you. And so the minute that we were late a house payment, singular, they had us. It was like, woohoo, now we can, now she's broken the contract, and now we can kick her out of the house.
Wow.
So anybody else they were willing to work with, but not me. And that wasn't a huge surprise to me. I just simply did not have the money to. Anyway, so yeah, the house is gone, and I'm just living in this little tiny cracker box, and it's all these years later.
So, at any point in time during all of this, did you ever say to yourself, I should have just taken their deal from the beginning and let them go and pay for it? Or did you continue on saying, no, I definitely did the right thing the entire time?
I knew I did the right thing, and to me, it would have been betraying the other homeowners. And so, whatever else happened, I know that that was not a line that I ever crossed.
Right.
Not even for a split second. And I want to make it clear that there was no ACLU. There was nothing. There was no organization. There was no nothing. There was God. There was God. And he was my strength, and he was my rock. And no money. Absolutely no money.
Was Gary, because Gary was working with Jackie, who...
Gary's boss, who by then had retired or whatever, his wife Jackie wasn't even speaking to me. It wasn't, look, I'm really sorry. Maybe I should have, known more or told you something. It was never that. The attitude was like, why are you doing this?
Right.
It wasn't.
So I'm sorry. I just want to make sure that we're on the same page. Brett, was his name Brett, her husband's name?
No, it was Rick.
Rick
was her husband's name.
And
so Rick had retired by then.
Okay.
He retired. I think he retired back in not too long after we bought the house. He retired.
Who was your husband's employer?
His boss.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
So at this point, was your husband still working for that company, or?
The company changed hands several times.
Okay.
It started out as Cox Cable. My ex-husband worked in the warehouse and just ran the warehouse for them, and then it would switch hands to TCI, and then eventually to where now it's Comcast.
Okay. Okay, so one question that I have of this is, what happened to all the loans after the real estate company went out of business? Because they basically blamed you for them not being able to be in business anymore. So what happened to all the loans that everybody had that this real estate company was basically paying after they paid them?
I wasn't a homeowner anymore, so from what I understand, from what I read, from what I understand, the homeowners, because the contracts were by then recorded and the excise tax had been paid, they were protected. So the homeowners just had a different company to send their money to. Was the only thing that happened. They didn't have to prove interest in the home. They didn't have to go through any of that. So from what I understand, was that everybody was safe and everybody was fine. I never got any kind of a notice because by then I had lost my home.
Right. Okay. And are you still friends with any of the people that were in that neighborhood, or what, had everybody completely turned their backs on you?
I'm not friends with anybody. A couple years ago, I was in Vancouver, and one of my aunts was in the hospital, and I ran into one of the homeowners who actually worked at the hospital, and she just said something to the effect that she was really sorry that I went through all that. But that was pretty much it. I don't have any ties to anybody. And I did want to tell you that I did win that 5-day jury trial. That when it was all said and done, that the jury 12-0 went in my favor. And so for all their efforts of telling the press all those years that if it took the last nickel they had, that no matter what it took, they were going to get me and make me pay for bringing all this to light. They lost, and I won. However, because of the mediation on my case against them, I walked away with nothing. So you win, but you didn't get anything at the end.
Yeah. So basically that $7,000 just went straight back into the attorney.
Yeah, he got half for his attorney fees and his expenses, and so out of the 15,000, we walked away with about 7,000, somewhere in there, and that is what I had to show for 6 years of my life.
My gosh.
Yeah. So I got nothing. You hear about whistleblowers that get these big payouts. I didn't get a dime. I didn't do it for a dime, and I didn't get a dime. It bothers me. I see ads, attorneys promising money to whistleblowers, big money to whistleblowers. To me, that is unthinkable. To promise somebody that kind of money, it is wrong, because there's no guarantee they're going to get that, and you're asking them to that's just wrong.
They're asking them to give up their life for an extended period of time in order to go into battle, and the only people who get paid are the attorneys, really. The only people who get money are the attorneys.
Exactly.
And it doesn't matter who, the companies themselves being, multi-billion-dollar companies. It's just scraps to them to pay these attorney fees.
Yes. The other thing I wanted to tell you is that in the process of everything I went through, I found out that there was actually a study being done by the University of Denver College of Law, and the professor's name was George Pring, spelled P like Paul, R-I-N-G, and George Pring actually wrote a book called SLAPP, Getting Sued for Speaking Out. And he told me, he said, the minute that you get the jury verdict, would you please call me? He said, Brenda, your story is the cornerstone for my book. And he said, it is so important. He said, my editor's publisher has been begging me to let this book go to press, and I've told them that until your case is done, it's not going anywhere. And so I am so thankful to him and to his study. I never received a dime from the book, and I don't really care. The idea is that the book is out there, and that it has been a help and a strength and an encouragement to so many, and that it has brought to light cases like mine, so that people are aware that these cases happen, that they're real, that they're wrong, and that it should be something that is stopped. And so,
what's the name of that book, Brenda?
Getting Sued for Speaking Out, and then it has the word SLAPPs, SLAPPS, strategic lawsuits against public participation, which basically means lawsuits that are designed to shut you up, intimidate you, harass you, and drag you through a long court battle, whether or not you've got any money to fight or defend yourself. They come at you with everything they've got to shut you up and harass you. And that is what I went through.
That is absolutely what they did to you.
Yes. And I had reporters call me from the Seattle Times in Seattle, PI, after talking to Warren Ashman, and they said, Brenda, we literally are afraid for your life. We fear for your life and your safety. Promise us that you will be careful. In fact, after these papers in Seattle did their articles, Warren Ashman picked up the phone and threatened them, if they continued with any more articles, that he would take them to court. And their response to him was pretty much, see you in court.
Wow. So you finally, you really finally had found somebody that was willing to tell your story and to help you get it out there, and he didn't care what happened to him.
Right.
That's great. So,
Yes.
I mean, that was definitely a promising turning point in the entire story.
Yes, ma'am.
Now, we were talking about the anti-SLAPP law and how it was the first anti-SLAPP law to happen in the United States, correct?
Absolutely, yes. 1989, Washington State's, they called it the Brenda Hill Whistleblower Law. And it is the first one in the country. And I am so honored to be a part of that and to have fought so hard for that. Like you said, lining up my children, my babies on Capitol steps and picketing and yelling and screaming and scratching and whatever it took, fighting to get that law enacted. In fact, the day that law was signed, there was a Associated Press reporter by the name of Dave Ammons that turned to my husband Gary and said, I don't know if you're proud of your wife, but there's not one reporter that ever would have dreamed that she would have accomplished what she did, and we are proud of her.
Oh man, that is... I'm sure that was a tearjerker, huh?
Yes, that meant so much. It meant so much. And so for me to be contacted and to be connected with other whistleblowers has meant so much. I did get a call from a doctor, and this was a really sad call for me to get. And this doctor was a surgeon in California. And I apologize, I do not know the name of the hospital, but he called me and he said that he had reported to the state that there was surgeries taking place that were not necessary, and that he said, my entire life has been ruined. He said, I have lost my home, I have lost my job. He said, I'm on the verge of divorce. And he said, I don't even know where to turn. And he said, all I wanted was to stop these surgeries that were not necessary and that were being charged to insurance companies and to the state, or whatever the case might have been. And he said, I don't even know where to turn. And he said, just to be able to call and talk to you means so much to me, because he said, there's no one who understands what I'm facing or what I'm feeling. And so to be able to be some kind of a comfort to him, just, there's not words.
Was that the moment that you realized how much of an effect you actually had, a positive effect that you had on everything that took place?
I think that I started realizing, because 2 years after Washington State's law was enacted, New York enacted their law. And then it was a short time after that that California enacted theirs. And so I started seeing one state after another, after another, after another, that was implementing and passing these laws. And I just felt so thankful that no one was going to have to face what I did. And just the stress of having to fight a lawsuit, a gag order, having your life turned completely upside down. Dr. Donald Sulkin, Soeken, out of the University of Maryland, he lives in Laurel, Maryland. And Dr. Donald Sulkin, he's a psychiatrist, did extensive research. His research included federal, state, and even housewife whistleblowers, all the spectrum, every walk of life. And the statistics that he came out with of the whistleblowers that were actually attempting suicide, the whistleblowers that felt suicidal thoughts, the whistleblowers that were divorced, that lost their jobs, lost their homes, he did such an extensive study. And when I testified before the House and the Senate in Olympia, I used the statistics that he had, and I looked at my legislators and I said, although I'm reading statistics to you, I want you to know that I'm sitting here as a living and breathing person who's facing these things, and I'm praying that you will see beyond just numbers and see me as a person, and that you will see what I'm going through is wrong and that something needs to be done so it never happens to anyone else.
A lonely soldier at battle to save the world. That, I can't believe it, Brenda. I mean, the strength that you have and the willpower. I mean, I am so overwhelmed with your willpower and, fighting for what you know is right. I mean, the impact that you have had on this nation. There are so many people who I guarantee are grateful for the anti-SLAPP suits now, but probably don't even understand how it came about and who really did it. So, I mean, that's what's so important about getting your story out there, is people need to know how bad this really is. And you were telling me that not. So how many states were you saying actually have the anti-SLAPP suit? Or
there are 17 that don't. So out of our entire country, there are 17 lazy, sleeping states that, to me, is unthinkable. 30 years, next year will be 30 years since the Brenda Hill whistleblower law was enacted. And to me, it's unconscionable that 30 years later, there are still states that benefit financially and in other ways because people are willing to stand up and speak out, and yet too lazy to fight for them, protect them, and understand the cost that whistleblowers go through. How many whistleblowers have been killed that we will never know their names? We will never see their faces. How many lost jobs, like me, lost a home, had their life so turned upside down?
Absolutely.
And that we have 17 lazy states is just absolutely. How do you wrap your head around that there's that many? And I promise you, it is with my last breath I will continue to fight for whistleblowers. And every one of them, whether it's Facebook or Twitter, around the world that I am connected to, it is a privilege. And to me, I don't look at whistleblowers and say, well, you're a federal whistleblower, you're a state whistleblower, you're a Department of Defense whistleblower or VA whistleblower, whatever. I don't see the title. I see the person. And so to me, I will fight for I will just as quickly fight for a VA whistleblower as I will for another Brenda Hill. It doesn't matter. A housewife doesn't matter. The title doesn't matter to me. That the protection is there. I know there's federal protection in place. It's not good enough. It's certainly not good enough. And I will fight for that to change. But for states to not have the legislation in place,
Yeah.
it's just wrong.
So, okay, I'm going to read off the states that I confirmed with you that were the 17 right now that don't have it. And so we're looking at Alabama, Alaska, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Michigan, Mississippi, Montana, New Hampshire, and New Jersey, North Carolina, North Dakota, Ohio, Wisconsin, Wyoming. So what, this is my question to you about these 17 states. If there is somebody listening that is either in these states or has the ability to do something in these states, who would you suggest that they would contact in order to, help bring the anti-SLAPP law into the state?
Legislators.
Okay.
Your senator, your state representatives, your state senator. Bang their door down, let them know that you won't take no for an answer, and that you won't rest until something's done. And that's where you have to start, is your legislators. I can send them letters, but I'm not a constituent, so they don't even have to respond to my letter or my phone call. To them, I'm nobody. But when you're a constituent, that's different.
So yesterday you were telling me that there are actually benefits to them in their, to the state itself. There's benefit to the state itself by having the anti-SLAPP laws. What would those benefits be for them so that our listeners can tell their legislators?
Well, basically, so someone is, they see something that's wrong, that needs to be reported. Well, it would make sense that one of the first things that they would want to do is look and see what protection is there for me. If something goes sideways like it did for me, what protections are in place? So then when they look and they go and they say, well, I don't live in a state where there's any protection, so I'm out in the open. I'm unprotected. Why should I stick my neck out for my state or my county or whatever? Why should I be willing to do that when I've heard all these horror stories? So that means that if it's fraud, where a company is defrauding that state in some kind of a way, or the county, or whatever, they just lost a lot of money that they may never hear about. Just like what the state said to me, without you, we would have never had our investigation. And so that's where they're losing, because these people aren't stupid. They're like, if my state's not going to protect me, why should I come forward with information? So that's where they're losing it right there, is people who are afraid and have every good reason to be afraid. And so the states are really stabbing themselves in the foot by not having the legislation. And I think people need to hold the states accountable that don't have that legislation in place.
I would say that if you can't get your legislators to do anything, it's time to let them go, right? I mean,
Yeah,
why wouldn't they want this? It could be their son, their daughter. It could be anybody that is close to them that could end up in the same shoes as you. So, I'm with you. I don't understand why anybody would even consider not doing this unless it's just full blown corruption from the start.
absolutely. Well, just case in point, the surgeon that I mentioned earlier that brought surgeries to the attention of the medical board in his state. So now you're dealing with people's lives and safety and well-being. This goes so much deeper than what people realize. You're talking about the builder, or someone in construction or whatever that's very knowledgeable, that's driving down the street, notices that they're using subpar material that could somehow down the road cause harm to somebody. So, I mean, there's such a broad spectrum. It's not always about money. It's about our safety and our well-being and that of our families.
What would you consider the definition of a whistleblower being?
I never felt comfortable with that term, and I think the reason is because I felt like what I did was the right thing to do, and that it was something that anybody else would have done or should have done, which is simply just caring about others, not just yourself. And I think that the definition is somebody that sees something that's wrong, that can cause harm or monetary damage to others. Being willing to stand up and say this is wrong and I care enough to do something about it. I'm not going to just ignore it. I'm not going to leave it for someone else. But I'm willing to stand up and speak out. I think that's somebody with some courage and someone who, when the scripture talks about treating others how we would want to be treated and caring about others, somebody besides just ourselves, I think that's really where that comes from, is caring enough to say something.
Absolutely. Wow, Brenda. I mean, no, there's no words for what you've been through, no words for what you've done. Is as far as all of this goes, was referring back to everything that we've talked about. Was there anything else that you want the people to know?
I think that my hope is they will, that they'll care more about what's happening in their state with legislation. I mean, obviously, my hope is with whistleblower or SLAPP legislation, but I think that my life has been changed forever, and that I became aware of not only my responsibility, but my privilege to vote, and to take time to know who my governor is, who my legislators are, and let these people hear from me, because talk is cheap. And change is when you're willing to write a letter, you're willing to send an email, you're willing to let your voice be heard in whatever peaceable capacity, manner. I think just I want to see people care more and be willing to stand up more. And I think it's always so often that we're waiting for someone else to be the one that speaks out. And so my hope is that people will care more about issues that are important and get involved. And so anyway, I think that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's very well said. So if you don't mind talking a little more, Brenda, this definitely was something huge, and there was a lot of publicity that came from it, both good and bad. This, however, this wasn't the last time that you and your family had made it into the paper. So from what I understand, your children all grown, your daughter. So tell us what happened with your daughter and Craigslist one Christmas shortly after this.
Absolutely. So when my oldest daughter, Angela, turned 17 back in 2000, she went into the Army, and she had a fascination for diesel mechanics. At first, it was to impress a boy that she really liked. And then 9/11 happened, and so my daughter ended up being deployed to Iraq. And so I had gotten an email from her, and it was at a time when my family was going through some medical issues with my husband. And so financially, things were very difficult for us. He lost a lot of work, missed a lot of work. And I got an email from my daughter asking could I send her some different things. She wanted beef jerky, she wanted candy, some different snacks that could be sent, without worrying about them being perishable. And so the question arose in my mind is, well, wait a minute, if my daughter is asking me for these things, what about her friends? What about her unit? So then I began to wonder how many people are in her unit. And so, but originally I had posted out of desperation. It was Christmas time coming up, and I didn't have any money to send my daughter anything. And so I put a Craigslist post out, and I was asking people if they would be interested in sending a card, a letter, or candy, something to a soldier. And I said, if you would be willing or interested, please contact me. I'll give you my daughter's contact information. I never in a million years expected the response. I never expected the people that would have their children sit down and make cards by hand for my daughter. I never expected the love and the outpouring that my daughter received. I cried because I felt the love and outpouring was so overwhelming. I wanted so desperately to hug each and every one of these people and to thank them for their love. Words can't express my thanks.
And okay, so this led into you receiving several pounds of food, right?
Yes, ma'am. There were, it was over 1,000 when it was all said and done. It was over 1,000 pounds of everything from beef jerky to hot chocolate to candy. So many wonderful items that were being donated, I was able, with the help of the community, I did things with the radio station, the TV, and the newspapers. And because of that, at $3 a pound, I was able to send to my daughter's unit 3 separate shipments of over 300 pounds each to her unit. And one of the things that my daughter said that just meant so much to me and to her, she said, Mom, there was a day that I had to we were doing a mission out in the desert in the middle of nowhere. And I had a lot of the stuff that you had sent, I had some of it with me. And we found an outpost where there was some Marines out in the middle of nowhere. And she said, I approached them and I said, would you be interested in some beef jerky? Would you be interested in some candy and some other things? And she said, Mom, their eyes lit up. And she said it was like Christmas to them. It meant that much that somebody from home would care enough to get them some things that just meant the world to them. And she said, Mom, I can't tell you what it meant to me to hand them these things and see their response. And it just made all of the hard work, it already was worth it. Don't get me wrong, it was already worth it. But to hear that from my daughter, to hear the reaction from these Marines of what to us would seem like such a small, no big deal thing, but to them it was everything. And so it meant the world to do that.
Your daughter has your heart, doesn't she?
I think she does. I hope she does.
She went out of her way to do something for those Marines that, she didn't have to do.
Yes.
And, she gets that from you, Brenda. You're a very proud mom, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
You should be. You should be. I was hoping you would share the story of the cereal. That just, that just made my heart melt.
Oh, please, yes, let me share that. And I wanted to also say that there was the day that I was in tears and I was praying and crying out to God because I didn't have the money to get that stuff to my daughter's unit. And a TV station called me in the middle of me crying and praying to God to help me get those items to Iraq. I want to just thank God so much for an answer to prayer. But there was a day that my daughter sent an email and she was asking for some specific cereal. And I thought, oh my goodness, that's so silly that she would ask me for these things. There's no cows out where she's at where there's milk, and I thought, I don't even have the money to go get these items. And I was just heartbroken because as a mom, when your kid reaches out to you and they're in the middle of the desert in Iraq, you're like, ask me anything and I want to do that for you, whatever it is. And so I was praying and my phone rang and this lady called me and she said, I'm moving out of town. I'm in a hurry and I was going to stop and drop all this cold cereal at the mission and I don't have time. Is there any way I could drop it off to you? Would you send it to our soldiers? And when she came to the door and she started bringing these, I think there was like 3 or 4, maybe, I think 4 bags. I don't remember exactly. But it was exactly the items my daughter asked for. And my eyes filled with tears. And I just looked up and I just said, God, thank you for once again hearing my prayer and coming through in the middle of what just seemed so like such a desperate moment for me. I just thank you for these people that are so giving and caring and loving. And thank you for answering my daughter's request when I couldn't. I'm just grateful.
That's amazing. I could probably hear that story every day of my life and it would still probably make me tear up. So what are you doing now? You told us that you're taking it upon yourself to ensure that the last 17 states have this anti-SLAPP law. And so we know that you're pursuing that. Is your daughter still traveling overseas? Are you still collecting things for the soldiers in the attempt to send things out?
I would love to do some of that. I would love to get back into doing some of that. My daughter is not in the military anymore. She did do 3 tours, two 16-month tours to Iraq and one 16-month tour to Afghanistan, as well as my son-in-law. And my daughter has just recently had a baby, so I know that she will forever be grateful for her time in the military, but my daughter was actually wounded in the military. My daughter was manning the 50 cal weapon, and there was an IED explosion. The soldier driving the vehicle could have not had any idea that they were going to be running over an explosive device, and the device, when it went off, it sent the vehicle up in the air, and my daughter's back went flying up against the back of the cab of the vehicle, and so she was injured. And I'm thankful that she's doing well and did just recently have a baby, but that ended her military career.
So how many years did she do total with the military?
I believe that my daughter did 7 years total, and that explosion changed the Army. It was their decision to give her a medical discharge. It wasn't her decision. It was theirs. And so I know that was very difficult for her, because it meant so much to her to continue to serve her country and to do whatever she could to make sure that the soldiers' vehicles were as safe as possible.
Wow. So I have to ask, is she married to the boy that she was trying to impress initially?
No, they split up, but her love for diesel mechanics and her fascination for anything diesel, anything mechanical has never stopped. I don't even know how to check my oil or my tire, or anything whatsoever. And here, not only is my son-in-law, but my daughter both diesel mechanics. And it's kind of funny, because when there is an issue with my car, my husband will tell me what he thinks it is, and then I'll put the phone up to the noise, and my daughter will say, "Mom, be real quiet." And she's always right, and he's always wrong, and I think that really irritates my husband. Without getting into what my son does or what agency, I will just say that my son is actually in federal law enforcement, but I will leave that there.
Okay. Yeah, it's understandable. I understand why. Now, you have a third child, right?
I do. Lynette is my baby. She's 33. So at this moment, they're 33, 34, and 35. And then Lynette is in Amarillo, Texas. And she actually, a few years back, had cervical cancer while she was pregnant. And so my husband and I and our family actually moved to Amarillo to be there for her during that time. And I am so thankful, because my daughter is cancer-free. She was actually stage 3. Um, and my grandson is now 6, just turned 6.
Oh, wow.
So her, um, uh, our prayers were answered, and I am forever grateful for that, because I know other families aren't always as fortunate.
Yes, yes. So how many grandchildren do you have?
8.
8.
I have 4 grandsons and 4 granddaughters.
Oh, wow. Nobody can have any more. They can't screw that up. That's just too perfect and even.
Now I do have a handsome stepson, so I'm putting in my order with that one.
Okay, so it's already screwed up.
Yes, I'm hoping that he'll give us some more, because I just love grandchildren.
Yes.
But they're such a blessing.
Well, good. Brenda, after everything that you have been through, you still laugh, you still smile. I can just feel the pain that you have over what has happened. I can hear it in your voice when you speak of it. But when we talk about the fun and the happy things, I can hear the joy and the love in your voice. You're such an amazing woman, and I am just so happy that you started following me on Twitter. I said, "Who the heck is this woman?" And I looked. You were my very first follower, and I looked you up because your profile says "look me up." So I looked you up, and I couldn't believe it. And so here we are 2 months later, after I watched your beautiful tweets that come out. The things that you tweet are just such hopeful, promising things. And it really is a joy to get to know you. It's a joy to speak to you. I can't tell you how much it means to me that you did this interview with me. I truly appreciate it, Brenda.
The honor is mine.
Thank
the honor
you.
is absolutely mine.
Now, before you tell me how people can get a hold of you, is there anything else that you want to say in general?
I think that I want to thank God for getting me through what I went through. Without him, there's no way I could have gone through what I did without his strength, without his love. I think I'm a better person. There's a professor of mine that said once that when we go through things that are traumatic, one of 2 things are going to happen. Either we're going to let it make us to be a stronger person, or we will allow it to make us bitter. And I think those words were profound, and I think they're true. I think that we choose with what comes our way if we will become bitter, or if we will choose to make us a better and stronger person. And I would like to think that because of what I've been through, that I am a stronger person, that I'm a more educated person. And I hope that it's made me more of a caring person. So I think that's what I would add.
Yeah, I would say that you were all of those things prior to this, and if anything, it's definitely greater, Brenda.
Thank you.
So, okay, so how can people get a hold of you?
They can certainly get a hold of me on Twitter. I'm very active on Twitter. And I focus on not only issues that deal with whistleblowers, but also law enforcement. I'm a proud law enforcement mom. I will forever back the blue. So I post a lot of things from the website Blue Lives Matter on Twitter. And I also look for things that have to do with First Amendment issues. As somebody that had a gag order for nearly 6 years, I know what it is to have someone try to go in and steal your First Amendment rights. And as far as I'm concerned, your First Amendment rights are for sale. And it shouldn't be that way, and it's wrong, but it's a fact that anybody at any time can walk into a courtroom and slap you with a gag order if they want to shut you up. And that's wrong. And so First Amendment issues are huge on my list. Military. I totally back our military, not only the niece of several military, but as a mother and mother-in-law as military. So Twitter, I'm on there at B, my first initial Brenda, B, Skylstad, Skylstad. So that's how you can find me on Twitter. I'm also on Facebook under Brenda Skylstad, and I would love to meet people there. And then years ago, in 2010, I started a prayer group called On Eagle's Wings on Facebook. And that group has about 18,000 people. I know there are some other groups called On Eagle's Wings, but if you look at the member amount, mine is at 18,000.
Wow.
And so I would love to hear from people either through Facebook or Twitter. And if they contact you, I'd be willing for them to get my phone number. I love hearing from people. I love meeting new people.
Wow, Brenda. Definitely empowering. Thank you so much, Brenda. Thank you for everything that you've done, not only for this nation, but what it took for you to relive all of this once again tonight. Thank you so much, Brenda.
Thank you for the opportunity.
All right, so as if you made it through the 2 hours and 20 minutes of this discussion, thank you so much for listening, and everybody have a wonderful day.